Hello and welcome to another session of Application Development Today. My name is Don Jackson. I'm a Chief Technologist here at OpenText, and I'm also your host of Application Development Today. And I'm pleased to have with me today Madam Dori Gonzalez-Acevedo. So Dori, welcome. And if you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself real quick.
Sure. So I am the co-founder and CEO of ProcellaRX. We are a startup. We just finished our first year out of many, many years of being in the making and partners with Micro Focus over the past, but we generated out in last February.
Micro Focus, you meant OpenText, right?
OpenText,
oh,
yes.
The dollar in the swear jar.
Definitely. I've been catching myself on a regular basis, and now my emails even are getting better at dividing the Micro Focus OpenText conversation.
Yep. So thanks for joining us today. So our topic today is to talk about modern validation. So comparing CSA and CSV. Some of our people that are listening to this may not even know what is validation. So, first question for you, Dori, is can you kind of, for the layperson who maybe either knows very little or nothing about what is validation? Because frankly, when I talk with people that don't know what is validation, they'll talk about verifying something and they'll use the word validate, which in a validation space has a completely different connotation. So what is validation?
It does. And it gets very confusing, even for those folks that have been in the industry for a long time. There's a lot of terminology to get through. So I try to narrow it down into a very, very concise sort of way to think about it. In regulated spaces, for anything that is regulated from an FDA or other regulatory body perspective in Europe or wherever you are, there's regulations. And what the regulations essentially say for computerized systems that are being used in drug manufacture or to produce any medical device associated to those, they need to be validated. And what that means is you have to record what you're going to make. You're going to have to make what you say you made, and then you're going to have to prove that you made it. And so those kind of three steps is what we call validation. And historically, it came from equipment validation and cleaning validation, actually in the manufacturing floor. But as the years have progressed and the more technology that we've used, it has to extend to those computerized systems, not only that govern those manufacturing equipment, but everything else that we use in order to get that data to those regulatory bodies. So that's kind of the broad definition that we use today.
Okay, so I mentioned a couple of acronyms earlier, right? And I didn't define them, which shame on me, right? I should always define my acronyms, but I knew we were going to talk about it. So, okay, so what is CSV then? Because I'm assuming, and of course I know the answer to this, but because you and I have been working together, frankly, since 2005, probably 2004?
Yeah, long time.
Long time now. It's not a comma separated.
We're grayer now.
Much grayer. Mine is actually white, right? I just skipped the gray phase. All of these come in, it's white now instead. But so when we say CSV, I assume that we're not talking about comma separated values, right?
Nope.
Okay, so what is CSV?
Yeah, so we're talking about computerized system validation, and that's any computerized system, whether it's embedded in a device or used to support that device or medical drug product manufacturing area. So it could be as simple as your document management system, that is a computerized system, or your SCADA and your manufacturing floor, the actual PLCs that are used in the manufacturing facility. PLC. I'm not sure exactly all of that. You caught me on an acronym that I not know. The actual instrumentation for those skids, right? So, and there's tons of other stuff in the entire supply chain that are computerized systems. It's just a matter of defining which they are. Some are more common than others in the industry. And when we talk about it, when you and I often talk about it, we're talking about applications that need to be tested. And when we use ALM and other tools like UFT and such, those are the actual applications that we have under test, and we consider those computerized systems.
Okay, so then what is CSA?
So CSA is computer software assurance. And over the last 5 or 6 years, there's been an initiative at the FDA called Case for Quality to evaluate what the industry as a whole have been doing well and not so well in regards to system CSV, right? So they kind of did an initiative with some pilot programs with medical device companies to say, hey, can we do this CSV process better, quicker, and what should happen and change? And so over the course of that time, they came up with a new draft guidance that was just recently published last fall called the Computer Software Assurance for Medical Device, right? And that was really specific, but it was also vetted out with all the other agencies. So those principles in that guidance document should be taken for any type of computerized system.
Okay, so and you talked about speed. So I was a customer, right? That's how I got introduced into validation. I worked for a company that was governed by FDA, and Title 21 CFR Part 11 just rolls off the tongue for me because of all those years of doing that. But it was also we had the Agile movement, the move to Agile. And those of us who are doing validation kind of laughed at that. We're like, yeah, no, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
We're still doing waterfall everything because for us, for us prior to doing, and we'll talk about paperless down the road here in a little bit, but prior to doing that, the process was for like a test script. We'll just do something simple as a test script, right? So the tester had to write the test script, and then they had to send that off to a lead to get it reviewed and approved and physically signed. So they had to print it off, send the piece of paper, have it physically signed, had to be in a specific format for the date. And then once the lead had approved it, then the business person had to approve it. Once again, inter-office mail, physically signed, proper date, format. The format
still
had to be
happens
correct
today, by the way.
And then they had to mail it over to the CSV person who did look at it from a CSV perspective to make sure that everybody did it. And then they physically sign and then properly date as well. And then send it all back to the tester. So now you have an approved test case that you could go ahead and do that. That's incredibly waterfall, right?
Yep.
Incredibly, it is waterfall by its definition. So when you start talking about Agile, it's just like, yeah, that's such a joke because I couldn't do a test until I had a requirement that went through a very similar process as well. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so that is what's shifting in the industry today, right? That breaking down that waterfall mentality and moving towards an agile mentality is definitely in play in most major organizations. And that's what ProcellaRX helps a lot of folks do. We come in and do kind of strategic assessments to see where you're at in that waterfall process and how can we actually advance you to a more agile process in order to get to the next step, which we love, right, is test automation. You can't get there unless you do that transformation. And so, but with the getting out of that paper mode, which there are still folks that do paper and still very valid use case out in the world, and we try to help those move off of that. But the first kind of transition from a history perspective was to just take those paper things that you were doing and put it in a system. And so we call that paper to glass sort of transformation. And that was going on a lot in the last 10, 15 years, just trying to get that physical paper assets into a system. And what folks have really understood and noticed is that that's not enough, right? You really need to hone in on the actual data and make it data centric. And in order to get to that data that's really important and key, then you can get to the next step in terms of test automation. So you need to have some of these steps in your process and your maturity, but at the same time, it's essential to get to the speed of which industry today wants to get to. And so what I'm hearing on the ground, we're getting to monthly and weekly releases of some computerized systems. And in order to get there, you cannot do the waterfall approach anymore. That's just not possible, right? So folks on the quality side of the business are being forced and challenged to think of things in different ways. And so that's also the three kind of main pillars of ProcellaRX is we want to rethink things, we want to reshape things and remake things because the old ways of doing things are just not enough. So that also kind of transcribes into what is part 11. And so you mentioned part 11. And so let's just do a little reality check here. So part 11 requirements are the actual law. Okay, so it's just also good for everyone to know. the Code of Federal Regulations is the law that's in place, and Part 11 is part of that law that's in place today, and that governs what and defines what electronic record and electronic signature is, and how it relates to one another is based off of other Code of Federal Regulations, which are called predicate rules. So you see CFR 210, 211, 820, all of those are other laws. So they're related. And so anytime you're submitting something or manufacturing something that is based on CFR 210, 211, 820, et cetera, Part 11 is applicable. Okay. However, the guidance documents that FDA and other organizations produce and release, they are guidance documents. And what that means is that they're an interpretation of what the current FDA mindset is around a particular topic. So the CSA guidance document that was produced in last quarter is a review of some key things around things that they are seeing as trends to change. It addresses agile adoption, and it addresses what to think of SaaS and vendors and how to relate to SaaS vendors. It talks about risk-based and true risk-based approach in terms of testing and making sure that you're testing something for the intended use as it relates to that predicate rule. All of those things are very much in alignment with other guidance documents that the FDA has done over the years. But it wasn't until it was almost intentional, and friends at the FDA would agree, and they talk about this often, the calling out of something new, CSA, kind of puts a jumper cable, right, on folks to say, hey, what do you mean? I'm not doing CSV anymore. What am I doing? CSA? Like, what is this? And it almost forces folks to start thinking differently and start questioning. Because at the end of the day, the FDA does not, what they audit to is what your company policies and procedures are. And a company is required to interpret the Code of Federal Regulations based on what they're producing and what they're doing today. So if a company is not following their own processes and procedures, that's a problem, and that will be flagged as a warning letter of 483. But it doesn't mean that they will necessarily question how you're interpreting those code of regulations. And by the way, FDA is happy to get on calls with folks to say, am I interpreting this correctly? Am I missing something? They very much want a partnership with the industry, but there's been a reluctance over the years to really kind of take them up on that. I've had folks say, oh, I don't want the FDA coming in and talking to me. They're doing it as a courtesy, as a free way to collaborate with industry. They want that collaboration. That's the only way the entire industry, the collective we, right, are going to grow. So we need a change in mindset within some organizations. Dare I say, like the dinosaurs with the gray hair might have to think differently, perhaps, in order to get over some of their fear factors of what might be uncomfortable for them.
So to answer the question of does, because I've been asked this question, does Title 21 CFR Part 11 still apply given to CSA guidance?
Yes.
The answer is yes. It still applies.
Correct.
However, it's the interpretation and using that guidance to help drive your interpretation. I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure, well, you and I have talked about this, so I know the answer here, right? But I can't tell you how many times I've talked to. You can talk to two different companies that are direct competitors of each other, right?
Yep.
And their interpretation of the law is vastly different,
Correct.
different. And their application of that interpretation into their systems that track this are vastly different. And you're just going, you sit there and you look at it and you go, I don't understand. You guys did read the same documents, right?
Yeah, it's hard. And that is why ProcellaRX exists. And I mean, we're really getting in there as a strategic advisor to challenge some of these old premises in order to help ease the gap on two sides. One is getting quality folk understanding what's going on in technology and the advancements in technology and why things are not as risky as they think. And on the IT side, educating from from their side why some quality folk interpret things the way they do, and helping them re-educate on the other side, right? So it is getting all the right folks to the table, and talking the same language, which is what I love about the Agile mindset in general, right? Because if you're adopting a true Agile mindset, everyone's coming to the table with the same set of working principles, right? And that everyone's agreed on what those working principles are. And it's a shared responsibility, not a siloed effect, right? Which is much of what we've seen over the years.
So we talked about that wonderful paper process. In your opinion, as an expert in the field, can we truly get to a paperless process? Is that realistic?
Yeah, it is. And it's actually one of my predictions. I know you and I talk about predictions of the future. The first companies to get there are going to lead the way, and it's going to be required at some point by regulatory bodies. There's not an ounce of doubt that that the regulatory bodies are going to want that. It's just a matter of when. And if organizations are not on a path to get to truly digital, data-centric models that are extractable and usable, they're not going to stay in front. They're going to lag behind. They're going to lag behind in their submissions. They're going to lag behind in their change controls. The FDA just published the other day a new guidance, and let me pull up the name of it. Where was it? It's a new guidance for AI and machine learning. Okay, so there is some new products out there for software as a medical device and using AI and machine learning. There's going to be a predetermined change control process for those algorithms that the FDA is going to want you to use. And so part of that means that you're going to have to do submissions electronically in order to get that pre-approval. It's almost like a TSA pre-check kind of concept. You're going to have that readily available within the FDA because they're really modernizing their approaches and they're hiring like crazy. They want to drive innovation and they don't want to be the ones to say no, right? So they're being very proactive in that regard.
And I think one of the underlying things that we've talked about so far is speed, right? Time to market.
Mm-hmm.
And if using that example I gave earlier of that test case, right?
Mm-hmm.
So each of those people were in different buildings, sometimes different cities. You think about, right, and just the speed of inter-office mail is vastly better than going outside, but it's still, you're looking at a day in between, right? So just to approve my test case, I have baked in 3 days.
Yep.
3 days. Once I think I'm done as the tester, I think I'm done. I now have 3 days before I find out if I was actually done, and Lord forbid somebody wrote something wrong and I got to reprint and start it all over again. Paperless. I do.
Paperless makes a big difference, right? It cuts out that logistical stuff. But I will say we're still challenged in the marketplace today with folks focusing and doing the work that needs to be done. So while we've moved to digital, there still is a SME component of review, right? And
subject matter
to actually review things in its entirety. Right. Mm-hmm. So part of this transformation is also right-sizing who and what at the different parts of the process actually really need to be part of the process. Right?
So maintaining this delineation of duties, right?
Exactly.
Making sure that the person who is the authority has to fulfill that role as the reviewer. Right. The reviewer can't be the author.
Right. And it has to be reviewing for the specific item that they're meant to be. Right. So, if we use design requirements as an example, you're not going to have a business person review design requirements. The business person is from a very, very different perspective, right? Your design requirements are meant and designed for actual developers to understand, right? Why have business part of that process when they're not adding value? So this also goes to the value stream sort of conversation. One of the things I'm excited about at OpenText is Value Edge, right? Like to start populating this way and to see from a broader picture what and how we're doing as an organization. And that power of that data is within those individual areas, right? Whether it's being ALM and Octane and all of that stuff, right? So it's really, really making sure that we're doing the right thing in the right area in order to bubble up all that visibility.
So we've talked about the things that are changing. So is that how the industry is trying to address these barriers to innovation that these regulations can introduce? Because frankly, I look at, like I said, 15 years ago when I maybe a little longer even, frankly, once again the white beard, but it was such a barrier to innovation. The process
Mhm.
itself was a terrible
Yeah.
barrier to innovation. Is there other things that you're seeing going on in the industry as well to help remove those barriers to innovation?
Yeah, so part of what I see, and also part of the service that ProcellaRX also does, is standardized workflow and configuration such that we're making things reproducible. So it's not just a COTS product, which, like ALM is, but what services like ProcellaRX offers is a way to do business for these specific industries so that they can come in and start right there, so that it's not something unique and different about them. Because part of if we're going to a data centric model, we need to standardize what we're collecting, right? And so that's really important. So that's one of my passions in really trying to educate the public about, is you can't keep doing these one-off things, because at some point in time we need to understand and standardize data. And so that's really key in this. So that's one area. I think the other area is really understanding risk. Risk-based approach, and truly understanding where the risks are within your systems, and that's an educational process. What I've seen, and more folks are trying to get educated about this, but it's a very nuanced conversation, as you can imagine, right? Some people understand risk in a very different way than others. And if we silo out the medical device and software as medical device, different use cases versus a standard application like document management system, right? Very, very different profiles in order to assess that risk, and that needs to happen on a more granular level.
And I think too the introduction of AI into this as well to help
Mm-hmm.
identify risk as well. So
Yep.
not to because these sessions we try not to talk about products, but frankly,
But it's
sometimes
important.
I can't avoid it.
Yeah. You're raising a great point, Don, because so as AI and machine learning become more critical, not only in the business, right? So the businesses are using them to drive innovation and product development within drugs and drug medical device and embedded as medical device, right? But the actual vendor software systems, right, are also using AI and machine learning, and they're experts. You guys are experts in that, and why not leverage that? And that's part of also the CSA movement, right, is to really leverage those expertise where it is. So tools in which folks purchase from OpenText, you guys use all your old stuff, right, and to test it and make sure that it's all good, so that the vendors and the sponsors on the other side don't have to retest that stuff, and they can actually focus on what's really important to them rather than the base applications that they're buying and investing in.
And I think one of the things we talked about in a previous episode, we were talking about the capabilities that AI is exposing and introducing in as we infuse AI into systems. So risk and understanding risk. What is risk in the physical world? What is risk in the digital world?
Mm-hmm.
Can be impacted by human behavior as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we use the example in a previous session where the system that with AI being introduced into it is starting to be able to surface information and trending information, like, anytime that a developer checks in code, this is an example, this isn't real,
Right.
but anytime a developer checks in code on Friday afternoon after 2 p.m., the defect rate goes up by a factor of 4. Therefore, anything that was checked in after that time on Friday afternoon between 2 and whenever their end of day is, needs to have more rigorous testing done.
Mm-hmm.
That's an amazing way to analyze risk
Yeah.
that we've
Mm-hmm.
never had the capability to do
Right.
before, and being able to to elevate that conversation about what is the definition of risk, what is truly becoming risk, and then how do I address that risk is something that frankly gets me excited with what we're seeing from an AI perspective.
Yeah, and so along those lines, just to insert there, the also biggest risk coming in from life science companies is cybersecurity, right? And so while traditional CSV sort of programs were really based on applications and use and what they did and didn't do, what you need to look more broadly, to your point, is so there's AI and machine learning introductions, but then there's the cybersecurity risks that are going on within the industry, and we need to focus on that. So it's shifting and reskilling some resources potentially to do other more important tasks than they had been historically doing, to get some of those historic tasks more automated, right? To get the low level hanging fruit done, and then move on to the bigger ones that require some more thought.
And then some of us, that have gray and white hair can come in and either reintroduce or introduce concepts that have been around for a long time that just aren't being leveraged, like test data management, right? Yep. So we could do a whole session. In fact, we're going to do a session in the future
that's great.
about test data management with one of our cybersecurity experts that focuses on that. But test data management. I talk with multiple life science companies, and it's amazing to me how many of them talk about they can't send me, to help troubleshoot whatever they're doing. They can't send me a screenshot of what they're working on at the time because it's got PHI information in it. And I was just sitting there going, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
You as a tester shouldn't even be able to see PHI information, right? Because...
Yeah. So there's a whole, I would love to be part of that conversation too. There's a lot, and also why ProcellaRX also helps with application managed services around structuring what needs to be tested, why it needs to be tested, all that sort of stuff, because I think we've forgotten, or maybe we're not educated enough in general of what really needs to be tested and why. And so kind of reintroducing some of those best practices is really critically important, right? Not all of that stuff needs to be tested nor documented either. And that's the other part of this. I was actually just giving a talk the other day about folks giving too much information, right? So that puts, if you give over information as well in terms of a regulatory body to the FDA, that subjects you to more scrutiny in an area that you potentially don't really need, right? And so you need to be very mindful of the data that you're capturing, and be able to defend why you're capturing it or not capturing it, and moving forward. But just capturing a ton of data just to do that is not also good business or compliance sense.
And if you do need to capture it, how long do you retain it, and what's your destruction? Yes. I mean, we could go down this entire rabbit hole.
Yeah. That's a whole other talk. Yes. Yeah. We should come back and do one on migration and data retention and what's.
We could do a whole session on data retention. Yeah. And it's funny, the TMI, right? Too much information, right? I had a boss, direct supervisor a few years ago that said, your whole job is to make sure I don't get deposed. That's your whole job. Whatever you put in here, just make sure I don't get deposed anymore. So, but
it's a valid
too
question,
much information.
Yeah, it really is. And so to be, just because computer systems can do all this stuff, and the thought also is, oh, well, data is cheap now, right? That's not true. Those are very, very wrong statements, right? The amount of technical debt some of these companies are incurring is exorbitant and does not need to happen. But it requires some hard looks at what they're currently doing and changing business processes associated to that. Could be potentially leveraging tools to do that for you. But without that conversation, they just keep doing the same old thing, right? We're just going to add another terabyte, and then what are you up to? That's a problem.
Well, I mean, we talk about it in the test automation space a lot. But I think it's applicable much more broadly, is just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Absolutely.
Right? You really need to evaluate what you should be, in this case, what data you should be storing and collecting. right?
Yeah.
But you can apply that across the board. Just
Yeah.
because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah. So how I address that is flip the question and use one of the things in quality is a 5 whys is a great tool to use with folks. You have to ask why 5 times in order to get down to the real root of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And if someone really can't get to that, a real root reason, it's probably not required, right? So just a helpful hint.
So it seems like a catalyst for, because some of the timings that we talked about some of this change, the catalyst for this was pandemic related. So
Mm-hmm.
we were whether your individual feelings about the pandemic and the political nature of that, I'm not trying to talk about that at all. What I'm trying to talk about is the impact of the global pandemic on the industry. And it seems like that we have had a quick transformation of what is done in validation because of the pandemic. Now that we're exiting this pandemic phase, the emergency powers are starting to go away. Um, how is the industry trying to focus that shift away from pandemic doesn't bring us back to where we were before?
Yeah.
What are we doing to prevent that?
I think that's a hard question. I think that I'm seeing the backslide in a couple different areas, and I know for me, we're just doubling down on this is a case for change. That the upsides of the pandemic or such, for example, of really evaluating what. Saying yes as much as possible until no was a thing that was meant life or death, right? And so if you kind of take that mindset and say yes as much as you can, unless it's absolutely necessary to put a stop to it, I think is one thing that the pandemic has taught us, and that would be really great to continue moving forward. I think that the opportunity here is to double down when we're in a quote unquote good space. There's nothing better than doing something hard when life is good, if that makes sense, right? So while we're coming out of the pandemic, we did some good lessons learned. Let's double down on that and actually take that to task and do some further advancements on things like agile mindset, right? The only way that a lot of these companies got through the pandemic was being agile as much as possible, was pushing the boundaries in a lot of innovation sort of ways. It was collaborating very, very regularly with the regulatory bodies in order to meet everyone's needs. And that should be a huge understanding and lessons learned from this. They want to be with us, right? And so rather than working against each other and having that mindset of, more protective or, having to be subservient to, actual true partnership, right? And there's a lot of different ways to do that, and would be great for more companies to get on board with that, because I think that would also help overall everybody.
So a big lesson here is to continue that partnership, right? Instead of going back to this adversarial relationship,
Right.
because a lot of times when a lot of times in my experience talking with people in life sciences is that the only time that the regulators are involved is when it comes to an audit. That is the only time that they're involved.
And that is a very big fallacy, right? Like, it should be regular communications with them. And so I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and the FDA presented again on the remote audits that they did during the pandemic. Absolutely, one, produced better, if not more consistent results from doing remote audits than in-person audits. And so those companies that participated in that are now on a fast track to continue that process because it was successful, which is amazing and great. Those that approached the FDA in an adversarial way, kind of not that they get flagged, but you kind of say, why are they not wanting to do this, right? So that's just human nature, right? So if you kind of don't show your cards, that that raises issues. One of the things often folks also come to me and say, well, there's no because I advocate for opening systems up for FDA to take a look at. You shouldn't be ashamed of your systems. If you've done your job properly, there should be nothing in there that you're unwilling to share. That's still not the same, mindset. There's a lot of folks out there that do not want that to happen, and they're producing all these documents and everything to present to auditors. But that's not going to last long term, right? Like that partnership is key. And I also think that the partnership within sponsors is also, the pandemic really highlighted how companies and organizations had to work together, right? Our supply chain is much more complicated than it was 5 or 10 years ago. We're all interdependent on each other. And if we don't collaborate effectively, we're not going to be able to move forward, right? So I think that that's really key in all of this, is how to create that collaboration, how to draw the boundaries that are appropriate, right? And really know the roles and responsibilities of each party, and what you're bringing to the table in order to help advance all of everything, product, process, people, right? As well as our culture.
Oh, absolutely. So any last parting thoughts that you want to have before we wrap this up?
Yeah. So it's interesting we just ended on partnership, because I think partnership, and one of the things I really value in the OpenText relationship and ecosystem, right, is the partners that we've created in that space. One of the things I value most is being able to talk with partners as well, to collaborate together as one of the few life science partners for OpenText Micro Focus, right? Like we have a wealth to share with everyone else, and I think each of us have our own SME in particular areas, and knowing what they are and then helping each other collaborate and move forward is a huge opportunity for us.
Yeah, and I would echo that partnership is very important, and I think it's evidenced too by this particular podcast series, right? So last episode was talking with a partner. This episode talking with you as a partner as well. Obviously, partners are very important, and recognizing that there are people who are subject matter experts in the field, and leverage those partnerships, because it becomes a symbiotic partnership in that way. So, Dori, as always, I thoroughly enjoy our conversations. Thank you for taking the time out of your day today. I know you're super busy, and it's hard to get it.
It's hot here too. It's like 80 degrees here.
Well, I can't say as I have a lot of sympathy living in the northern Midwest of it being hot in the springtime. Sorry for your loss. I don't know. But thanks for taking the time today.
Absolutely.
I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. And for everyone listening, feel free to tune in for our next session. Our next session is going to be on containerization. What is a container? How does it fit into my CI? How does it impact my world? I look forward to having that conversation with. We're actually going to have the guests on that one. We're going to have somebody that develops containers, and then somebody who is that person's customer. So you can see it from both perspectives, which I think will give a unique viewpoint from both sides. Awesome. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and thanks again, Dori, for joining us today.
Thanks, Don. Take care.
If you liked the video, please click the like button. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you get notified when we release new videos.